So, good afternoon, everyone, and apologies for the lack of tech skills here, but we're having a little conversation here today on Zoom, and then those of you who are seeing this on LinkedIn will know that we've then copied it onto LinkedIn as a way of getting our conversation on there. But really excited to have this conversation here with my colleague Claire Mackinnon. And I think I'm trying to remember when we actually met. It's got to be over a year ago, I think. Would you say?
Yeah, I think it was about that, maybe a little longer ago.
Yeah,
It was songwriting, I think we started talking to each other about
yeah. Well,
initially.
essentially, what happened, I think, was that we knew of each other in the kind of the coaching community, and I just thought you'd be a really cool person to get to know. And I remember I was going to just check out your website for 5 minutes and just get a bit of an idea of who you are and what you do. I ended up spending well over an hour on there because you tell the story of your life up to that point, and I was just captivated by it. And so, your skills and your openness as a storyteller has always impressed me and resonated with me. And so that's why I thought it would be a great idea to have a talk about storytelling today.
Yeah, no, I'm looking forward to it. And
Yeah,
cool that it was storytelling that had us meet.
absolutely. So maybe just introduce ourselves a little bit. I think most of the people, certainly who are on Zoom, know me or you. But for those who perhaps will be watching later after the event, um, perhaps just to put into context, perhaps I'll say a little bit about myself,
You
and
go
then
for it.
you say a little bit, Claire. So yeah, where do I start with storytelling? Actually, it's good that Vince is on the call because he's one of the people who's been instrumental actually in helping to shape me as a storyteller. I've got a long history as a trainer in the tax and accounting world, and been doing that for well over 20 years, and wanted to help people with that. And then I found actually, as I started to grow into that business, it was like, is this really where my heart is? And I started attending speakers clubs like Vince was there, like Vince used to run. That's where we met. And I found that as I was attending them more and more, and I was started running them, I found that telling stories was a really amazing way to connect, both just in terms of community, like as a small group, but also if you want to build yourself as a business owner or as an employee, or even just like in friendship circles. It's just one of those amazing, powerful tools that seems to just resonate with all humans really, and brings us all together.
Mm.
So that really is my focus now as a public speaking coach, is around having people um, get clear on their message, share their message online, in person, and primarily through the medium of storytelling. Um, so yeah, Claire, why don't you tell the fans out there, the fans, a little bit about I think I'm on TikTok or something now. Yeah, about your background and maybe your connection to stories as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I can guarantee. I think TikTok will be a place you will never see me. And so I'm Claire McKinnon. I'm a leadership and career coach. That's my day job, and I've been doing that for a number of years now. 4 years I've been a full-time coach. But my passion for storytelling is something that's evolved more recently. So I I can talk a little bit later about how I got into it, but what you said there really resonates with me, Richard. I think some of the most powerful moments I've experienced as a coach is when I'm listening to other people's stories. In my coach training, I think that was one of my first experiences of community storytelling. So we did exercises there where we were sharing stories with one another. And I think they were little clues to this. But for me, I love writing stories. I love writing and sharing stories based on my own experience. So I would describe myself as a budding memoirist. This is how I see it. And for me, writing's how I make sense of my own experience. It's how I make sense of how I feel, things that have happened. And I find that if I write that down, and most of that never gets seen by anybody, but occasionally I write about that, and there are insights or lessons I've taken, and I then think this I think would be useful for people. This is something that might help other people. So then I choose what I might share in different places. And I've just found the more I've done that, the more I've stepped into that, it's probably the greatest gift it's brought me is connection, deeper connection with others. I mean, we met because I decided to share my stories.
Mm.
So there's all kinds of gifts that come out of it. And I, yeah, I've just finished the draft of my first book that's currently being edited. And I've also got a blog that I started. Well, I've had a business blog for a while, but I've started something completely new recently. It's called Glitter and Biscuits. It's on Substack. And this is writing that I share that has nothing to do with my day job as a coach. So I've kind of released myself from my writing, all having to be about leadership and career change and corporate. And I share some of the experiences I'm having in other parts of my life, which includes dancing and being a mother, and really nothing's off the table. It's whatever I feel like sharing, whatever I feel like writing about. And that's proving very enjoyable. So yeah, this is, and I'm just kind of, I've just followed what feels good. And yeah, these things have started to happen for me. Yeah.
That's great. And there's a few things that are popping into my head as you're talking. I mean, one of them is around the freedom. You know, sometimes we can get, particularly as business owners, we feel like we need to tell a narrative and we need to fall into a certain way of,
Yeah.
you know, saying certain things and saying it in a certain way. But there's that kind of freedom of just like, you know, I'm just going to tell a story and this is going to like, you know, be therapeutic for me as the storyteller to get it out on the page and get it out of my body
Yeah.
and out my mouth, and at the same time, um, not restricting it in such a way that it feels like, you know, it feels more awkward or, you know, it's just like that freedom.
Yeah. Yeah. I totally, that is a word I'd use. I noticed, so I've been sharing my stories on LinkedIn for a couple of years, and I noticed in the summer, I just started to feel this kind of dullness, and it started to feel like a bit of a chore. I think I was boring myself. It's kind of, and I was like, okay, this is worth paying attention to. So I did completely stop. I gave myself permission to just stop, have a proper break from it. And then I realized exactly what you've just described. I was tired of, there's some really cool things happening in my life. You know, writing the book was one of them. But any topic that I thought of, I'd fall into this habit of, okay, how can I make this relevant to my job as career and leadership coach? And there's always some way you can spin a story, but I don't want to spin stories. I want to really look at, okay, what is it I'm genuinely learning here, or what is a shift I'm genuinely notice, and whether that's relevant to my day job or not, if that feels good to share, and I think that may be useful for people, I want to share that. And the minute I made the decision to start Glitter and Biscuits and give myself permission to do that, it was interesting because I started to enjoy sharing on LinkedIn again. I think I needed an outlet
Yeah.
for that kind of part of my creativity. Yeah, and I think people can feel in the energy, they can feel if you're really enjoying what you're sharing versus if it's just something you've kind of fallen into a habit of doing. And yeah, I guess we change over time. So I've got used to doing a certain way of storytelling, and there's nothing wrong with doing that. And I was wanting something else. And I feel like actually this other way is of more service to people as well. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think what's coming up for me there is, you know, storytelling for me is all about emotion. Um, I mean, I could get into the the dissection of what a story really is, and that's an interesting question in itself. But when I was running a storytelling circle the other day, what came up for me was how actually it's about one's own emotional perspective on a set of facts. It's not the facts itself. It's like it's the emotional journey that the characters in that story go through. And so to that extent, it's like people are picking up on your emotional journey, and that's having an impact on their emotions as they are receiving it.
Yes.
They may not be the same emotions, of course, though I would hope that if there's a kind of vibrational
Hmm.
exchange going on here, that they probably are. But it's interesting that that can be transmitted even, via words on a page,
Yeah.
as opposed to, in person.
Yes. No, I really, yeah, I love the way you've just described that. And certainly I noticed when I've shared things, when I was doing it more as a, this is something I'm doing every week because I'm getting these stories out to kind of support my visibility with my business, where there was almost a bit of a dullness in me as I wrote it. I do notice a correlation in the engagement, and how people respond, the visible response. Whereas when I've like loved writing something and I can't wait, to share it, even if it's not about something particularly exciting, it just feels fun to share. Again, it tends to get or if there's not even if it's a positive emotion, but if there's a stronger emotional current with it,
Mm.
yeah, there's more of a response.
What what kind of responses do you get? What's the
Um, I have quite a few people. So I mean, it's talking about LinkedIn,
mm.
for example. People obviously hit the like button, the love button, they leave a comment, but I think one of the responses that often touches me most is where I get a little private message from somebody. So I've had people leave voice notes or, a private message where they might not want to say in front of in the out in the open or in a public space, but they just share what that brought up for them. And that connection to me is really precious. And when I started doing this, I didn't really know that was something that might happen. It doesn't happen all the time, but when it does, it really kind of makes me realize, yes, this matters, because I
Mm.
think it's easy for us to think, does this really matter? Is it going to make any difference if I spend the time and energy, crafting this into something that's useful for others, putting it out there? Because it does take energy. And we don't, there's no tangible reason for doing it beyond it feels like a good thing to do. It feels like the right thing to do. So it does feel, to me, it feels rewarding when you have some little winks from the universe via people that choose to let you know that just thank you, and this is what it brought up for me. And often it's something quite different to what I might have written the story about a certain topic, and it's actually brought something completely different up for them. Because I guess another thing is we don't know what impact our stories are going to have. And it's not that necessarily people are relating to exactly what you went through, but I think often people are relating to, oh yeah, I felt that way, or
Yeah.
I've had a similar experience, or even I haven't had an experience like that, but it's helped me understand what it might be like for other people. So I think it creates connection in all kinds of ways that are quite
Yeah.
magical. Yeah.
Uh, So, and as you're speaking there, what came up for me is around. So I shared over the weekend. I knew I wouldn't get much engagement because if you post on LinkedIn at the weekend, it's not. I'm learning it's not the best time. But I wrote about one of my favorite songs from this year's Eurovision,
Mm.
and it's about a kind of a difficult relationship, sort of at the wrong time, and I kind of resonated with it. Um, and it had a real kind of heart connection to me. And that's another example of telling stories is through other forms of art and
Mm.
you know poetry, dance, music. Um, but it is that kind of connection to the story that's being told, and that might be that you resonate with it because it's the same as thing that you've gone through, or maybe it just creates connection because you've been
Mm.
authentic and open, and people resonate with that.
Yeah.
Um, and it's interesting. So I ran a storytelling course last weekend, and there was most of the time uh, during the 3 hours was allocated to a storytelling circle, and it just like the atmosphere that was created in the
Mm.
room between us was just really the energy was I can't really describe it. I can't put it into words, but it was that even if not all of us had gone through the same things as the other as each other, it was that feeling of community that we created
Yeah.
just through that experience. So yeah, so having those little signs, as you say, through little private messages or whatever, shows you that it's being created, from a distance, if you like.
Yeah. Yeah.
One of the things that we promised to go over, or at least talk a little bit about in this, was around making it easier to tell your stories, or to make it more comfortable. Because I know, for example, the story that you share on your website, about your career and how it impacted the rest of your life. I mean, that was very, I mean, I don't know how it felt writing it, but as a reader, I was like, wow, this is really raw and open and honest. And it felt to me like it took a lot of bravery and courage and expose, to expose yourself in that way. So I don't know if it was like that for you, but I'm curious about what you do, or things you put in place to help it make it easier for you, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, I think because this isn't something I used to find easy. So I feel like I have been on a real journey with this. I used to avoid it and tell myself I didn't want to do it. I didn't want to do it. Um, and when I did, it used to take a lot of energy, but I also knew there was something there for me. So one of the things I think has really helped me is that I have not put pressure on myself to share stuff I've been discerning about what I share and where. So I think, my nervous system has kind of increased its capacity, I think, to be able to do that. So putting that story on my website actually doesn't feel like a huge deal, because when people are on my website, they're there because they're choosing to be there. They're curious about working with me or finding out more about. So to me, that feels like that whole story is shared there for people who want to understand why I do the work I do, why I care about it, some of the struggles I've overcome. So that to me feels like, oh yes, that feels like I feel really grounded in myself when I think about sharing that there. If I thought about, sharing that story in its entirety at the same time I put it on my website a few years ago, on LinkedIn or Instagram or something, where anyone can kind of walk into that space, that wouldn't feel as good to me. And I think one of the ways I've been able now to put stuff out there, just out into the wild west, if you like, because social media is a bit like that. You don't know who might read it, who might leave a comment, is that I have also just got in the habit of sharing stories in spaces regularly that feel good to me. So I am part of a women's circle, and I have read them some of my work that I would like to share, but it feels scary. And I've read it to them, and their response has kind of nourished me and given me more solid ground to then go out and share elsewhere. I've also, before I started sharing on LinkedIn with any kind of regularity, I set up my email list, and this was before I had any email software. There were 60 people that I've worked with before, that I know from coaching circles, etc. And one day I just felt inspired to share a story with them, and I said, I'm going to be setting up an email list, and I haven't done it yet, but I just didn't want to wait until I got all the text. So here's something. And the response I got from that was really lovely. So people kind of thanked me and said, thanks for sharing this. This is what it brought up for me. So again, sharing in these kind of smaller spaces, I think for me, and with some of the past experiences I've had, and I'm going way back to like childhood now, just blasting things out on social media as a first step for me didn't feel good. It didn't. So I think there's something about knowing what your capacity is. And, I think in social media, you can feel this pressure to share everything. And it's kind of, I just always think something else that's really helped me is with anything that I'm considering sharing, I ask myself, is this honest? Is it authentic? Is it of service? And I check in with myself. And my process often involves, I write things and I let them cook. I don't necessarily share them on the same day, because most of us are never trying to be inauthentic or dishonest, but sometimes we're not honest with ourselves. So we may write something and actually, it might be a bit actually from the ego's point of view. I want people to see that I'm like this, and I just find if I let myself write stuff like that and then look at it a couple of days later, I can I can kind of realize, is this a story that is actually going to serve by telling it or not?
Mm.
It helps me. So I think another thing is allowing yourself some time. You don't have to write something and share it the same day. Write it, sit on it, see how you feel a week later. Um, that has also been a useful technique.
Yeah, I love that. There's a couple of things there for me that point there. I must admit I'm a bit of an impulsive poster. Like I'll get an idea in my head and sometimes I'll sit on it, but often I'll just write it and send it because I know that I'll probably overthink it
Mm,
if I wait. But that's just me. But I do actually, now you've said that, I recognize that sometimes the impulse to write does come from a place of like needing attention or that ego place. Um, and it gets satisfied, right, by me
yes.
pressing post, right?
Yeah.
But then maybe it's not the impact that I want to have. So I love that you point to that, and being clearer about like almost like what your intentions are,
Mm,
um, because we all know, right, that if you sleep on something, you wake up the next day and often you have a fresher perspective on it. So
yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
yeah, the other thing that I learnt about a couple of weeks ago was, and I think this ties in actually quite nicely, is around the different types of stories that we tell ourselves,
Mm,
and also then we get out into the world. And again, the type isn't based around the facts; it's about our emotional connection with the facts. So you could be in a place where something feels really raw to you, and you feel like you want to get it out there, and it's just there for you to heal. I guess it's part of your healing journey, right? And so therefore maybe you don't want to share it in, like, want to post it all on LinkedIn or, like, do a Facebook Live. Like, you want to maybe even just talk to a family member or a
mm,
therapist, or as you say, like a women's circle, or a small circle that you really trust.
yeah.
um and there's no right or wrong here. Like, it's that is a form of story. In the methodology that I was hearing about, it's called victim story, but I prefer to call it tender story, because it's about having that connection with it still in a really tender and vulnerable place for you, but using that storytelling as a way to actually release that,
Mm,
um, as opposed to something where you're feeling more grounded and having healed to some extent, and so therefore you want to come from a place of, hey, this is what I've learned, this was my experience, this could help you. That um that I refer to as an inspiring story.
mm,
So it's almost like where you are in your journey can dictate or be a factor in what
yeah.
support you need, perhaps, and where you might choose to post or.
Yeah, no, I think you're spot on.
Mm,
Yeah, another term, literally it's just popped in my head as you talk about the victim and the reframe
mm.
to the tender story. It's a kind of, to me, they're like work in progress stories. It's like I am we're all works in progress, and it's just this snapshot of, oh yeah, I'm noticing this feels difficult, and um yeah, and it doesn't always need, like you say, to be tied up with a bow, and this is how I've overcome it, and here's the answer, and I'm completely over it. I certainly notice in my own process there are certain themes that I seem to be writing about again and again. I'm learning the same lesson again and again in different places, and that's okay. I think sometimes we need to. That is part of how we change. It's a bit of a cycle. Um, and that in itself, I think, is quite empowering for people, because it's, sometimes I think, we things get marketed to us. It's like, oh, if you read this book or if you do this program, you'll be sorted. And it's no, doesn't work like that. So to actually have people acknowledge that and say, yeah, I sorted this and now this is happening, or I'm learning this lesson again in a different place, is, to me, that makes me breathe a deep sigh of relief, because it makes me realize, oh, I'm not the only one then.
Yeah, exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. And I remember we were talking about this when we were planning, well, roughly planning what we were going to talk about. And I remember we were talking about hero's journey as well, which has this kind of connotation of You know, I went through this experience and now look at me. Again, there's another type of story, which I call the ego story. But it is that thing about like, but no, life isn't like that. You know, you don't come
Mm.
to an end and live happily ever after. You know, we're always going through new stories and new
Yeah,
experiences, and they're feeding on each other.
yeah, yeah. Um, I think the other thing that really has been very liberating, if we're talking about ways to kind of make it easier or get unstuck, for anyone listening who wants to experiment more with storytelling, is I used to hold it's a bit uncomfortable to say it out loud, but I kind of used to, when I shared something, I used to be very attached to what would happen next. So if I put my heart into sharing this story and my time, you know, I would feel really disappointed if I didn't get much visible response. And I I really think there's something liberating when we kind of just go, you know what, I'm just going to share this story, and I'm sharing it for a place of service, and to try and be unattached to what visibly happens.
Mm,
Because one of the things I know, and it's, you know, often I'll speak to people who have seen things I've written, but they haven't visibly engaged with it, and that's their choice. But they mention it to me, or they say, oh, I really like that thing you shared about XYZ. It made me think about this. We just don't know what impact stories are having. We will never know. You know, social media can make us think we know, but we don't. Someone could be clicking like, and they might not have even read it. They might just think, oh yeah, you know, I'm just supporting Claire or whatever it is. So I think this being unattached, and I also want to say that we are built for connection. So there is something as well about when I do, and this is only something I've started to do recently actually, but when I do receive a particularly, you know, heartfelt comment, or someone, for example, shares a voice note with me, I have actually started, I have a little book, and I just write some of those in there, because I think it's very easy to share something, and, you know, people kind of make comments and you just kind of forget about, you don't really take them in, you know, because
mm,
you're having a busy day. So someone left me a really lovely voice note a few weeks ago about something I've written, and I listened back to it and I wrote down some of what she'd said, and I've got that to keep now. And just the act of actually writing it, you know, it's kind of fuel to keep going, because we're not, although it's good to be unattached, also we're not sharing stories because we want them to go into a bottomless void, no one to hear them or no one to respond. We want some kind of response that feels good, because then we feel in connection. So
yeah,
I think anything you can do, and we're all different, that's working for me as a process. But that, I think, reduces the need to see a certain response, and it's certainly kind of tricking my ego and nudging it out the way, which is really helpful. Yeah,
yeah. Because we can all get disheartened, right? When
yeah,
we're putting stuff out there and we're getting nothing back, particularly when it's online or
yeah,
not in person.
yeah.
But I really love that as an idea. Yeah. I suppose that leads a little bit on to, you know, like the difference between what we called this session stage or page, partly just because I like stuff that rhymes, and I just thought it was cool, and I couldn't pass up the opportunity to use it. But there is something about the difference between that, you know, speaking, and it can still be metaphorical stage in the sense that it doesn't have to be a platform with a lectern, you know, it can still be in a circle,
Mm.
or whatever, as opposed to the written word, which I think is a very different thing. I know that your focus has been on the written word up till this point, but and maybe I could share my reflections as
Mm.
well. But I'm curious about the differences you found between those two media.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely, writing is my first love. So like I've said, I write for me, and that's led me to share my stories in writing. But what that has led to is, you know, as I've put stories out there, I've been invited to speak on podcasts. So conversations like this with someone else in a kind of intimate conversation. And I've noticed, um, I think there's something about doing what you enjoy. So start with what you enjoy and see where it takes you. I think that can be a useful perspective, because as I've started doing things like this, I've realized I actually enjoy talking about things that have happened as well. And I've just started to tell some of the stories I'm writing about in groups as well. But yeah, there is a difference in how I think in how you present stories. And there are some, I was speaking at a women's event the other week, and there were actually parts of my book that I shared with them. They didn't necessarily know that's where the stories were taken from, but that's where they were taken from. But I did tweak, how so it was more conversational. But I think rather than overthink it, I've just found it really interesting that when I've just committed to one kind of medium, it's led to other opportunities. And I've just been kind of open to experimenting, said yes to the things that feel
Hmm.
good to me. Because if you're going to spend time doing something, why do it in a medium that you don't enjoy?
Yeah, that's a
I
good
think
point.
that's so, we can think, oh, to succeed or to be visible or whatever. The reason is that you want to get your stories out there. It has to be in this certain format. But I think, again, people can feel your energy. So if you're doing it in places and you're clearly enjoying yourself and you're relaxed and grounded, and that's coming across, whether it's in the written word or speaking, that will translate.
Hmm.
So yeah, that's definitely something I point to.
Yeah, and also I think it depends on the individual and also perhaps on the story or so for example, I mean I do love to I do love to be on stage. It's kind of like one of my happy place.
Mm,
Um but there are perhaps certain things that I wouldn't feel comfortable sharing to a group that I would feel comfortable sharing on social media. Which I know some people would probably prefer it the other way around. So it's almost like finding, like checking in with your body and like,
yes,
where would I feel maybe you don't have to feel 100% comfortable, like there's definitely something to be said for pushing expanding your
yes.
range as an individual. But it's like, there's also the point where, oh, I have actually got a rubber band because I wrote about this on LinkedIn
I
last week.
remember. Yeah.
But stretching yourself so far that it breaks, right? You don't
Yes.
want that.
Yeah.
Stretch it to stretch you, but not to break you, right?
Yeah.
So,
Absolutely.
yeah. This is great. Is there anything else that came to you? I'm conscious probably we want to be finishing up around 10 to, and I'm also curious, perhaps you're not going to start a discussion here, but if anyone has any questions they want to put in the chat or anything that they're curious about before we finish, I think we'd be happy to
Yeah.
talk about that. But is it before, while we're waiting for that, is there anything else that you think it's worth saying?
Yeah. I think there's something about giving ourselves permission to write. I think it's there's some advice out there that's kind of, tell stories about what's trending, look outside and kind of look at what stories are resonating with people or what's current, and tell stories about that. I take completely the opposite approach. So I really kind of do this from a kind of inside out point of view. And so for example, the World Cup's happening right now. That is something that um I have some interest in some of the issues that are being discussed around it. But that, when I think about writing about that, it's, if I did that, I'd be doing it to jump on the bandwagon. That's
Yeah,
like when I check in with myself, that is this authentic? No, it isn't. I'd be jumping on the bandwagon. And I noticed I was writing about this the other morning, kind of in my journal, and there actually is a bit of a story there about a certain angle to do with it, but I don't feel ready or want to share that right now. I'm going to let that one cook. It might be when the Euros are on, that one comes out the bag. Who knows? But I think it's okay. If I kind of start from a question: what feels true for me? What's high on my mind? And when I write from that place, that's when I usually get to stories that are worth sharing.
yeah, I really resonate with that
Yeah.
because for a long time I knew I needed to be more active on social media, and I knew that storytelling or putting a point of view across was the way to do it. But I really resisted scheduling it, and I know a lot of people do that, like at the start of the month, right? 20
Mm,
posts, right? No,
yes.
post number one. That just doesn't work for me because it's like it's not true to me. There's no spice there, you know. It's not
Mm,
authentic either. Or at least
yeah.
if it is, I'm like, whoa, I've got a lot of content to write 20 posts that I know about in a month. So
Yeah, and I think, if you're writing about something that's in your consciousness, you are, by doing that, you're likely to be touching on the universal as well,
yeah,
you know. So, but we don't need, for me, certainly, I don't try and do it from that other perspective, because then it just takes it into a different place and it becomes something that feels less authentic. I did see a question pop here.
yeah.
Yeah,
Stephen said, do you recommend writing or speaking about the writing process, stroke reflections that you have? Um,
it,
actually,
it's, I can
mm,
answer that if you
mm,
like.
sure.
Richard, it's something that I've started doing recently. Um, because it's something that's again, because it's been very present for me. So this is something I've been writing about in Glitter and Biscuits rather than on LinkedIn. But some of the things I'm noticing, for example, as I'm publishing a book, so I'm meeting with the editor that's looking at it for the first time tomorrow, and that's very triggering. So it's triggering a lot of stuff. So I've written about some of that and what I've noticed about the place it sends me to and the way it wakes up my ego and my need to impress and all of that. Um, but I think it can be really useful to write down what you're noticing about your writing process, and often that is useful
Mm.
for other people. There might be little tips that you've noticed, little things work for you. This could then be useful to share with others who might not have experimented in the same way. So yeah, I think in answer to that question, do you recommend? I think if you feel like it's something you'd like to write about, then
Yeah, and
go for it.
sometimes the creative process can feel like a bit of a kind of like weird science mystery thing, like magic almost,
Yes.
you know? And so perhaps I kind of like that in a way
Yes.
because there is something ooh about it. But then also like it can also be a bit intimidating for someone who's starting up, you know, writing stories or writing songs. And it's like, how do you do that? Actually, there's some great books out there about songwriting, about storytelling that actually, yeah, if you get a bit of an insight into the greats, you know, that gives you a bit of an idea of how you might get started, I think. And then you find your own style and your own
Yeah,
way.
definitely.
But I think inspiration is important.
Yeah. A book I highly recommend, that's certainly been a big part of me getting unblocked. Is the best way to describe it is The Artist's Way by Julia Cameron. Um, and that is a book all about, like, she really demystified the creative process for me, and she's a very fun woman, and there's all kinds of exercises and perspectives in there that just really help do exactly what you've just said, Richard.
Yeah.
It won't resonate with everybody. It resonated with me, and some of the practices she recommends, if you stick with them, are, one of them, for example, is morning pages, 3 pages of complete gobbledygook first thing in the morning. I mean, that's where my book was born from, those pages. That's when I realized what I wanted to write, why I wanted to write it, and it really did propel me to actually start to take some action.
Mm.
So yeah, that was a Christmas present for me. My husband gave that to me last year, but I said to him it's the best present he's ever given me. So I don't know how he's going to top it this year. Yeah,
No pressure. Yeah, it is. It is that thing. I think a little bit of structure can help
yeah,
sometimes. You know, for the most creative of us, who are sometimes a little bit head in the sky. Oh, like actually to bring us down to earth sometimes is pretty good.
yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, Vince just said that he likes writing, but and actually I like hearing and seeing Vince's stories both in person and in writing as well. He's written some great books on public speaking,
amazing.
where he also shares some stories from his time um, growing up in Manchester, etc. So yeah, it's been a fabulous conversation. I've really enjoyed it.
Yeah, me too, Richard. Thank you
Um,
for asking
yeah,
me.
yeah. So what we're going to do, we're going to post this on LinkedIn. Finally, it will be on LinkedIn. Um, yeah. So how can people follow you if they want to know more about your stories and
Yeah, of course. Yeah, so please feel free to follow me on LinkedIn. Um, you'll find me on there, Claire Mackinnon, MAC. Um, and also, yeah, if you're the other place that I share my stories, I'd say more fully, is on my blog, which is called Glitter and Biscuits. And if you go to substack.com and type in Glitter and Biscuits in the search bar, you'll see it pop up. But that's where I share just once a week. I share a story from my life. At the moment, I'm writing a lot about where I am with this creative process and the book and whatever else is coming up. But yeah, if it feels like it would be, if you're curious about that at all, it would be great to see you there. Yeah.
Fabulous. And obviously, everyone can find me on LinkedIn. I'm doing a lot of, I'm just launching a new signature talk program next year where we're going to be focusing on how to give a great TED talk using stories. So, currently recruiting for that. So, anyone watching wants to get in touch with me to learn more, then please do. And yeah, it's been a fabulous conversation. Hope to have more of them soon. And I'd be interested to see how everyone watching this found it. Please post your comments in the
Yeah.
comments box. Those of you who are watching this on LinkedIn, and yeah, thanks a lot again, Claire, and all the best, and we'll
My
speak very
pleasure.
soon.
Thanks,
Yeah.
Richard.